One final warning, one chance, cross the line and face complete erasure. Humanity does not forgive mistakes. Subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi to witness more epic tales of human courage, strategy, and unstoppable power. For centuries, Earth was seen as a quiet and unimportant world, hidden on the edge of known space. Among the vast galactic civilizations, humans barely registered as a developing species. Their planet showed no massive fleets, no aggressive expansion, and no loud political demands. From a distance, Earth looked calm, divided, and slow, a place still struggling with its own problems rather than reaching for dominance among the stars. Alien observers studied humanity through long-range scans and indirect contact. What they saw confirmed their assumptions. Humans argued among themselves, wasted resources on internal conflicts, and advanced technologically at a pace far slower than the great empires of the galaxy. Their ships were few, their colonies small, and their presence beyond their home system limited. To the watchers in distant councils, Earth appeared harmless, a world that would eventually fall under the influence of stronger powers without resistance. Human diplomacy only reinforced this belief. When contacted by alien representatives, Earth responded politely and cautiously. Their messages were respectful, formal, and often restrained. They spoke of cooperation, trade, and peaceful coexistence, never making demands or threats. They avoided showing strength, choosing instead to present themselves as learners in a vast and dangerous universe. To many alien leaders, this behavior looked like fear or weakness. What the galaxy did not understand was that humanity had learned a powerful lesson long before reaching the stars. On Earth, history had been shaped by wars, near extinctions, and moments when survival depended on restraint rather than pride. Humans had learned that loud power invited challenge, and open strength attracted enemies. Silence, patience, and preparation were often safer paths. So when humanity stepped into the wider galaxy, they chose to observe rather than dominate. Earth's technology was deliberately understated. Ships carried systems hidden behind layers of false limitations. Energy signatures were masked, weapons were disguised as research tools, and defensive networks were buried deep within civilian infrastructure. Even human colonies were designed to look fragile, scattered, and dependent. To outside eyes, they seemed easy to pressure and easier to control. Meanwhile, Earth listened. Human analysts studied alien politics, military patterns, and cultural behaviors. They watched how empires treated weaker species and how quickly alliances shifted when power changed. Every insult, every invasion, and every erased civilization was quietly recorded. Humans did not protest loudly or interfere. They observed, learned, and planned. Inside their own systems, humanity prepared in silence. Artificial intelligences were trained to think beyond conventional warfare. Fleets were constructed in hidden shipyards far from trade routes. Weapons were developed that bent physics in ways alien science had never attempted. Yet none of this was announced, tested publicly, or shown as a warning. Earth chose to remain underestimated. To the galaxy, this quiet planet seemed insignificant. Trade routes passed it by. Military planners ignored it. Expansionist species marked human space as future territory, something to be claimed when convenient. Earth became a footnote in star charts, labeled as neutral, non-threatening, and compliant. This was exactly how humanity wanted it. They understood that the first impression in the galaxy often decided a species' fate. Loud newcomers were crushed, proud ones were challenged, and ambitious empires were broken by older powers. By appearing small and careful, humans avoided early attention. They gained time, and time was the most valuable weapon of all. As decades passed, the galaxy grew comfortable with Earth's silence. Human worlds existed, traded modestly, and followed the rules set by stronger civilizations. No one suspected that beneath this calm surface, humanity was waiting. Not for conquest, not for glory, but for a line that must never be crossed. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth was just another quiet planet. To humanity, it was the calm before a warning that would only be given once. The first signs of trouble did not arrive as explosions or open war. They came quietly, wrapped in legal language and diplomatic excuses. A powerful alien coalition, far older and larger than humanity, began to take interest in the outer edges of human space. These regions were rich in minerals and positioned near valuable trade corridors. To the coalition, human colonies looked weak, isolated, and poorly defended, making them easy targets for pressure. At first, the actions seemed minor. Alien mining vessels entered disputed zones near human settlements, claiming shared ownership based on ancient star maps. Trade ships were delayed, searched, and taxed unfairly. Human cargo was confiscated under vague security laws. None of it crossed the line into open violence, but each act pushed a little further than the last. It was a test, carefully measured to see how humans would respond. Earth noticed everything. Reports flowed in from colony leaders, traders, and navigation fleets. Human analysts compared patterns and quickly understood what was happening. The coalition was probing for weakness, using legal gray areas to justify expansion. They expected fear, anger, or desperate resistance. Instead, they received calm messages and formal complaints. Human diplomats sent carefully worded responses. They cited treaties, historical agreements, and mutual cooperation laws. They requested discussions, offered compromise, and asked for restraint. There were no threats, no raised voices, and no shows of force. To the alien coalition, this behavior confirmed their belief that humans lacked the strength to defend themselves. Encouraged by the lack of resistance, the coalition escalated. They established permanent stations near human colonies without consent. Patrol ships lingered longer, flying closer to civilian traffic. Human settlers were detained for questioning and released only after long delays. Supplies grew scarce on frontier worlds as trade routes became unreliable. Still, Earth did not strike back. Instead, they documented everything. Every violation was logged, every message recorded, every move analyzed. Human leaders understood that reacting too early would only justify further aggression. The coalition wanted a loud response, something they could label as rebellion or hostility. Humanity refused to give it to them. Behind closed doors, debates raged within Earth's councils. Some argued that allowing these provocations made humans look weak and invited more abuse. Others reminded them of the long plan. Strength revealed too early would lose its impact. Humanity needed undeniable proof that the line had been crossed, not just to justify action, but to send a message that would echo across the galaxy. The coalition made their next move with confidence. They announced exclusive control over several systems that humans had been settling for decades. The declaration was public, broadcast to neighboring species, framing humans as temporary occupants who lacked official recognition. It was humiliation disguised as policy. Earth responded with a single unified statement. Calm, clear, and precise, it rejected the claim and restated humanity's right to its colonies. The message warned that continued violations would force consequences. There was no emotion in the words, only certainty. The coalition laughed. To them, this was the sound of a small species pretending to stand tall. They dismissed the warning as empty posturing. Their fleets continued forward, their pressure increased, and their leaders began planning how to absorb human space entirely without triggering wider conflict. What they failed to understand was that humanity had been waiting for this moment, not for the inconvenience, not for the insults, but for intent. The shift from testing boundaries to openly denying human sovereignty was the signal Earth had anticipated. Across human space, systems quietly changed status. Fleets that did not exist on public records began to move. Artificial intelligences reviewed millions of possible futures in seconds. Defensive networks shifted from passive observation to active readiness. None of this was visible to the outside galaxy. To alien observers, it still looked like humans were doing nothing. The first provocation was not meant to destroy humanity. It was meant to push them aside. It was meant to claim their space without a fight. Instead, it marked the moment humanity stopped merely observing and began preparing to answer. The coalition believed they were teaching humans their place in the galaxy. In reality, they had taken the first step toward crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. The moment humanity decided to speak was not sudden or emotional. It was the result of long observation and careful judgment. Earth's leaders knew that words, once released into the galaxy, could never be taken back. This message would not be a threat made in anger or fear. It would be a boundary, clear and final. Human diplomats gathered evidence from every violation committed by the alien coalition. Trade interference, unlawful occupations, false claims, and civilian harassment were organized into a single record. Nothing was exaggerated, and nothing was hidden. The goal was not to persuade the coalition, but to inform the galaxy. Earth wanted witnesses. When the message was sent, it went out on open channels, visible to every major power and neutral world. There were no dramatic speeches or emotional language. The tone was calm, controlled, and direct. Humanity acknowledged the coalition's actions and stated, without hostility, that these actions had crossed acceptable limits. Earth made its position simple. Human space was not negotiable. Human colonies were not temporary. Continued violations would no longer be met with diplomacy alone. Consequences would follow. The message did not describe what those consequences would be. There were no numbers, no demonstrations of power, no displays of force. Just one sentence that stood out from the rest. Humanity would issue no further warnings. Across the galaxy, reactions varied. Some smaller species felt a quiet sense of relief. They had seen empires crush weaker civilizations before, and Earth's restraint felt familiar. Others were confused. Humanity had never spoken with such certainty before. This was not a plea or a request, it was a statement. The alien coalition, however, reacted with amusement. Their leaders analyzed the message and found nothing that worried them. No fleets had mobilized openly. No weapons had been revealed. No allies had publicly stood with Earth. To them, it looked like a bluff meant to save face. They discussed the warning in private chambers, mocking the idea that a young species could enforce such a line. Some even suggested that Earth's message was proof of desperation, a final attempt to slow the inevitable. Publicly, the coalition responded with polite dismissal. They acknowledged the message and claimed misunderstandings. They spoke of shared space and mutual benefit while quietly continuing their expansion. In their minds, Earth's warning had already failed. What the coalition did not realize was that the warning was not meant for them alone. It was meant for history. Within human space, the message had a different effect. It unified humanity completely. Political divisions faded as every government understood the weight of what had been said. There would be no retreat now. No further debate. The line had been drawn, and everyone knew what crossing it would mean. Military systems shifted into silent readiness. Civilian populations were not alarmed, but preparations began quietly. Evacuation routes were finalized. Supply networks were secured. Human society did not panic because this moment had been expected. Artificial intelligences reviewed the warning again and again, confirming that it had been delivered exactly as intended. Clear enough to understand, calm enough to be respected, final enough to leave no room for doubt. In distant systems, older civilizations took notice. They had seen this pattern before, though rarely. A species that warned only once was not weak, it was confident. Some began adjusting their own policies toward human space. Others started to watch more closely. The galaxy slowly returned to its routine. Trade continued. Borders shifted elsewhere. To many, Earth's warning faded into background noise, another message lost among thousands of diplomatic exchanges. But time passed, and the coalition continued its advance. Humanity did not repeat the warning. There were no reminders, no protests, no follow-up messages. Silence followed, deep and complete. To the coalition, this silence confirmed their belief. Earth had spoken, been ignored, and retreated. To humanity, the warning had already done its job. The rules were now clear. The responsibility no longer rested on Earth. When the line was crossed, the galaxy would remember this moment, not as a threat that failed, but as the last chance that was offered and refused. The line was crossed without hesitation or misunderstanding. The alien coalition did not attack by accident or miscalculation. It was a choice made with confidence and arrogance. Their fleets moved openly into human-controlled systems, ignoring all previous agreements and the warning Earth had issued. This time, they did not hide behind legal language or diplomatic excuses. The first strikes targeted civilian infrastructure. Communication relays were destroyed. Trade stations were disabled. Supply ships carrying food and medical equipment were seized or wiped out. Human colonies suddenly found themselves isolated, cut off from help and information. The message was clear. The coalition wanted submission, not negotiation. Across human space, people watched the attacks unfold through delayed signals and broken transmissions. Images of burning stations and drifting wreckage spread quietly. There were no speeches from Earth, no emergency broadcasts filled with fear. Human leaders remained silent, allowing events to speak for themselves. The coalition believed this approach would break human morale. Civilian targets were chosen deliberately. They expected panic, mass evacuations, and desperate pleas for mercy. They expected Earth to beg for talks or offer concessions to stop the destruction. None of that happened. Human colonies followed protocols that had been prepared long ago. Emergency systems activated automatically, shelters sealed, backup networks came online. Local defenses engaged just enough to protect evacuation routes, but not enough to reveal their true strength. To the attackers, resistance seemed weak and disorganized. This illusion encouraged the coalition to push further. They escalated quickly, striking deeper into human territory. A major colony world was bombarded from orbit, its surface cities damaged but not destroyed. The attack was carefully limited, designed to send a warning rather than cause extinction. The coalition wanted Earth alive and frightened. In their command chambers, alien leaders watched the results with satisfaction. Humanity still had not responded militarily. No fleets appeared, no counterattacks were launched. To them, this silence confirmed everything they believed. Earth was overwhelmed, paralyzed by fear, and unable to act. What they could not see was the shift happening beneath the surface. Across human space, silent orders were executed. Fleets that did not exist on any known registry completed their final positioning. Artificial intelligences stopped predicting outcomes and began selecting optimal paths forward. Defensive systems switched from passive observation to active engagement readiness. Still, Earth did not speak. The galaxy watched with mixed reactions. Some species were horrified by the coalition's actions, but said nothing, unwilling to challenge such power. Others viewed it as a lesson, proof of what happened to those who dared to resist stronger empires. A few remembered Earth's warning and felt uneasy, but even they doubted anything would come of it. The coalition issued a public statement after the attacks. They claimed the strikes were necessary enforcement actions. They accused humans of non-compliance and instability. They framed the violence as order being restored. Earth did not respond. This silence frustrated the coalition more than resistance would have. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted fear. They wanted proof that their power was recognized. Instead, they were met with nothing. Behind that silence was control. Human leadership had anticipated this exact scenario. The choice to attack civilians removed all remaining doubt. There would be no need for debate, no moral uncertainty, and no diplomatic hesitation. The galaxy had witnessed the crossing of the line. For the first time since the warning, Earth's preparations shifted fully into motion. Systems that had been dormant for decades activated in perfect coordination. Commands moved through channels invisible to alien surveillance. Every step followed a plan refined through generations of restraint. The coalition celebrated too early. They believed they had delivered a crushing blow, but in reality, they had struck the surface of something far deeper. Humanity had not responded because it was weak. Humanity had not responded because it was waiting. The attack did not break Earth. It finalized Earth's decision. The moment the first civilian target was hit, the warning ended. The rules changed, and the responsibility for what came next belonged entirely to those who had chosen to cross the line. The galaxy did not notice the moment humanity revealed itself because there was no dramatic announcement or sudden declaration of war. There were no warning sirens, no public broadcasts, and no visible movement that could be tracked by foreign sensors. The change happened quietly, like a shadow passing over a star. Across human-controlled space, systems that had appeared inactive for decades came alive. Deep space shipyards, hidden far from common routes, opened their bays. Vessels emerged that did not match any known human design. They were larger, darker, and strangely silent, producing energy signatures so controlled they barely disturbed surrounding space. To outside observers, nothing seemed different. To humanity, everything had changed. Artificial intelligences that had once only observed now took command. These were not simple machines built for calculations. They were strategic minds trained on centuries of human conflict and alien behavior. They did not feel anger or fear. They calculated outcomes, minimized loss, and selected actions that would end threats permanently. When they activated, human response became unified and flawless. The first alien patrols to encounter these changes did not realize what they were seeing. Their sensors failed to register incoming objects until it was too late. Ships vanished without explosions, without wreckage, without signals. Crews had no time to send warnings. To their commanders, it looked like equipment failure or navigation error. Then it began happening again and again. The coalition's outer fleets started reporting missing units. At first, commanders dismissed it as coincidence. Space was dangerous, after all. But patterns quickly emerged. Ships operating in or near human territory were disappearing at an impossible rate. No battles were detected. No debris fields appeared. Entire squadrons simply ceased to exist. Human weapons did not behave like anything the galaxy understood. They did not burn or tear ships apart. They erased them. Space folded inward, energy collapsed, and matter was removed so completely that nothing remained to analyze. It was as if those ships had never been there. As the coalition scrambled to respond, they faced another shock. Human fleets were not advancing in obvious formations. They did not gather at borders or move along predictable routes. They appeared where needed, struck once, and vanished. Every movement was precise. Every target was chosen for maximum impact and minimum exposure. Communication within the coalition began to break down. Command centers lost contact with frontline units. Navigation systems failed in regions near human activity. Attempts to map human movements resulted in conflicting data and false readings. It felt less like fighting an enemy and more like being hunted by something unseen. Meanwhile, Earth remained silent. Human citizens were not shown triumphant footage or propaganda. They did not cheer in public squares or demand revenge. Life continued with careful normality. Humanity understood that what was happening was not a war for pride, but a correction to balance. The coalition finally realized their mistake when one of their heavily fortified fleets was neutralized in seconds. This fleet had been positioned far from human colonies, chosen as a show of strength. It vanished without a trace. No attack warnings were triggered. No defensive systems activated. One moment it existed. The next, it did not. Panic spread through coalition leadership. Emergency meetings were called. Scientists were ordered to explain the phenomenon. Military leaders demanded targets they could strike back at. None were found. Humanity was everywhere and nowhere at once. Only then did the galaxy begin to understand what Earth had been hiding. Humans had not been slow to advance. They had advanced differently. While other species focused on size, speed, and firepower, humanity focused on control, concealment, and finality. Their technology was not built to fight wars endlessly. It was built to end them. Alien civilizations watching from afar felt a growing unease. This was not brute force. This was restraint unleashed, a power that had been held back so long that when it moved without hesitation or mercy. Still, Earth did not speak. No explanation was offered. No demands were made. The warning had already been given. Now, the galaxy was witnessing what happened after it was ignored. The coalition had crossed the line believing humans were weak. What they faced instead was humanity revealed, not as conquerors, not as tyrants, but as a force that had chosen patience over fear, silence over noise, and preparation over pride. And once revealed, it could not be unseen. The moment of reckoning arrived with terrifying clarity. The coalition had believed that humanity's silence and restraint were signs of weakness. They had thought that crossing the line would provoke fear, compliance, or a hasty retreat. Instead, they triggered the full force of a power they had never imagined. Human fleets moved with precision, striking simultaneously across multiple systems. Every attack was calculated to remove the threat completely, leaving nothing behind to regroup or retaliate. The first targets were the frontline fleets that had pushed too far into human space. Ships that had once seemed formidable vanished in moments, their entire presence erased without debris or radiation signatures. Communication systems within the coalition scrambled as reports of disappearing vessels spread. Commanders could not understand what was happening. They could not predict it. They could not stop it. Every attempt to respond was met with instantaneous counteraction, and every action failed before it even began. Civilians, who had once been caught in the coalition's assaults, now watched the reversal quietly. Their worlds were no longer under threat, and the danger that had seemed unstoppable vanished before their eyes. Systems that had been crippled were restored automatically. Emergency infrastructures, maintained in secrecy for decades, sprang into life. Medical facilities, power grids, and supply networks operated perfectly, demonstrating the efficiency humanity had cultivated through years of preparation. The coalition's leadership panicked. Entire fleets were wiped out in hours, and their homeworlds began to show vulnerability. The precision of human strategy left no room for escape or negotiation. Any attempt to regroup was anticipated and neutralized. Alien commanders realized too late that they had underestimated the depth of human foresight. Every strike they had made against civilians and colonies had provided humanity with the exact evidence it needed to justify total action, and humanity acted without hesitation. Across the galaxy, observers were stunned. Star systems that had monitored Earth from afar saw the sudden disappearance of fleets that had been considered among the most powerful. Communications went dark from entire sectors, leaving silence where activity had been constant. Analysts tried to calculate what had occurred, but the scope and speed of the human response defied their understanding. Ships, stations, and weapon platforms were gone as if they had never existed. Entire commands vanished, leaving no survivors, no debris, no evidence of failure. In the coalition's command centers, chaos reigned. Senior leaders struggled to maintain control. Orders were given, then immediately contradicted by systems no longer functioning. Panic replaced confidence. Strategic plans dissolved as humans anticipated every move, nullifying every effort. It became clear that the coalition's initial arrogance had led them into a trap they could not see until it was too late. Humanity's approach was not reckless destruction. Every action was precise, calculated, and necessary. Systems that could be spared were left intact. Infrastructure that supported life was preserved, and civilians were protected from harm wherever possible. Humanity's goal was not to spread fear indiscriminately, but to remove the source of aggression completely and permanently. Every strike was a lesson in absolute control, demonstrating the consequences of ignoring Earth's warning. By the end of the first day of coordinated attacks, entire sectors of the coalition's space were empty. Their fleets were gone. Command hubs had disappeared. Strategic resources had vanished. The galaxy, which had once laughed at humanity's warnings, now watched in disbelief as evidence of their power became undeniable. No retaliation could be organized. No rallying call could be made. Humanity had erased the coalition's ability to continue the conflict entirely. Alien governments outside the conflict observed with growing fear. Reports of complete fleet eliminations, missing colonies, and vanished stations spread rapidly. What had seemed like a minor species issuing a minor threat now revealed itself as a civilization capable of instantaneous and absolute response. The psychological impact was immediate. Observers began reconsidering assumptions about human weakness, realizing that every act of restraint had been preparation for this moment. Earth itself remained quiet. There were no celebratory broadcasts, no announcements of victory. Humanity had acted according to a plan that prioritized precision over spectacle. The coalition had forced the line to be crossed, and the consequences had been delivered in full measure. The galaxy witnessed a species that had been underestimated, showing the true extent of its power, and the lesson was irreversible. By the close of the operation, it was clear. Any future threat to human space would be met not with negotiation, but with the certainty of total erasure. The first attack, intended to provoke fear, had instead revealed the full scale of humanity's capability. The galaxy learned in hours what it had ignored for centuries. Crossing the line drawn by Earth came at a cost that no species could survive. Shock rippled across the galaxy like a wave no one could stop. Entire fleets, once thought untouchable, had vanished without a trace. Worlds that had seemed secure were now silent. Alien civilizations scrambled to understand what had happened, but the scale and precision of humanity's response left even the most advanced minds bewildered. Records of the erased fleets and colonies were incomplete or impossible to verify. The galaxy was silent, not out of respect, but because no one could believe what they had just witnessed. Panic spread quickly among governments. Military councils held emergency meetings to reassess strategies, alliances, and defenses. Older civilizations realized that every assumption they had about humans had been wrong. They had underestimated humanity's planning, its technology, and its patience. They had assumed that the quiet planet, the restrained species, was weak. Now, that same species had erased opponents with surgical precision, leaving no opportunity for retaliation. Fear replaced arrogance, and caution replaced hubris. The coalition that had attacked first became an example across the stars. Their disappearance was total. Communication signals were gone, fleets were missing, and their colonies were rendered uninhabitable for years due to the precise nature of humanity's actions. Other civilizations took note, not only of the effectiveness of human strategy, but of its restraint. Human strikes were lethal, but controlled. No unnecessary suffering had been caused to populations not involved in aggression. The galaxy began to see humanity not as a threat, but as a force that demanded respect, a species whose warning could not be ignored without consequence. In quieter systems, observers discussed what this might mean for the future. Traders, diplomats, and explorers who had never interacted directly with humans were forced to reconsider their calculations. Humanity had shown that it was capable of acting decisively and without public fanfare. The sudden shift in power dynamics made old alliances fragile. Species that had once considered colonizing or exploiting human space now hesitated, unsure if their plans would end in total annihilation. Political factions across the galaxy scrambled to adjust. Some called for immediate contact with Earth, hoping to negotiate peace before further aggression might occur. Others considered building stronger military alliances, but even that seemed risky. Humanity had acted with speed and precision beyond the comprehension of most, and any move could provoke consequences that no civilization was ready to face. The galaxy had learned that one species could no longer be underestimated, and it was a lesson learned through fear, not diplomacy. Meanwhile, Earth itself remained silent. There were no celebrations, no broadcasts of victory, no messages sent to boast. Humanity had acted decisively, but its message had already been delivered. The silence of Earth was as powerful as its actions. It left the galaxy uncertain, tense, and respectful in a way that no declaration or parade could achieve. To humanity, the job was done. The line had been crossed, and the consequences had been enforced. There was no need for applause or acknowledgement. The lesson was permanent. Over time, rumors began to circulate about the capabilities humans had revealed. Stories of vanished fleets, erased stations, and perfectly executed strategies spread from system to system. While many were uncertain about the full truth, the impact was undeniable. Every alien civilization, from the largest empires to the smallest colonies, understood that humans could not be treated as a minor species. Every calculation, every plan that involved humanity, now had to consider the possibility of absolute retaliation. Some civilizations quietly adjusted their policies to avoid any conflict with human space. Trade routes were redirected. Diplomatic efforts were renewed with extra care. Observers monitored Earth, not with hostility, but with caution. Even older empires realized that the quiet planet, the one they had long ignored, had suddenly become the ultimate power, capable of enforcing its will without question. The galaxy entered a period of stunned silence. Humans were no longer underestimated. Their patience, intelligence, and capability had reshaped the political and military landscape. The memory of what had happened spread slowly but surely. Leaders remembered the consequences of ignoring Earth's warning. Traders, explorers, and diplomats learned to approach humanity with caution. Fear, respect, and awe replaced arrogance and dismissal. For the first time in history, humanity's power was recognized not through loud declarations or conquest, but through precise, undeniable action. The galaxy had seen what it meant to cross the line, and the lesson was permanent. Humans had not sought glory or revenge. They had enforced a boundary, and the impact of that enforcement would echo across the stars for generations. Every civilization now understood that Earth's warning had not been empty, and that one careless action could lead to complete erasure. The galaxy had changed forever, and every species knew it. Humanity's actions had left no doubt that Earth was no longer a quiet planet, no longer an underestimated species. The story of fleets erased and colonies neutralized spread quickly, reaching even the most distant civilizations. Leaders who had once ignored human warnings now understood the full weight of crossing the line. The memory of the coalition's destruction became a lesson etched into every diplomatic and military calculation. Trade and communication across interstellar space shifted. Species that had relied on coercion and intimidation to maintain influence began to reconsider. Any attempt to challenge human space was now too risky. Even minor violations could lead to consequences that were swift, precise, and total. Earth's silence, following the enforcement of its warning, created uncertainty and respect. No one knew what humans would do next or what strategies they might employ, but everyone knew it would be effective and unstoppable. Within human space, life returned to its normal rhythm. Citizens went about their daily routines, unaware of how closely the galaxy watched them. There were no public displays of victory or celebrations broadcast across star systems. Humanity had acted not to gain glory or dominance, but to protect itself and enforce the boundary it had declared. The message had been given, the line had been crossed, and the galaxy had learned its lesson without further violence. Efficiency, precision, and restraint defined humanity's victory more than any display of brute force. Alien civilizations, now fully aware of what had happened, entered a period of deep reflection. Military planners rewrote strategies, diplomats reevaluated treaties, and historians documented the event as a turning point in galactic history. The quiet planet that had once been ignored had become the standard by which caution, intelligence, and preparedness were measured. Humanity had shown that power was not measured by size, numbers, or noise, but by patience, strategy, and the ability to act decisively when the time was right. Smaller civilizations, those who had once feared being absorbed or oppressed, saw hope in humanity's actions. They observed how Earth had protected its citizens and enforced its sovereignty without indiscriminate destruction. While the power displayed was overwhelming, it was also controlled, targeted, and deliberate. These civilizations began to reconsider their own approaches to diplomacy and self-defense, recognizing that careful planning and unity could prevent domination by larger powers. Even the largest empires in the galaxy adjusted. They acknowledged that humanity's warning, previously dismissed, had been final. Any future miscalculation could result in irreversible consequences. Alliances were reconsidered, and policies of intimidation were reevaluated. Humanity had reshaped the political landscape, creating a balance of fear and respect. To challenge human authority now meant risking complete erasure, and no species was willing to take that gamble. Across trading networks and exploration corridors, the story of Earth's enforcement spread in whispers and reports. Scholars debated the technology and tactics humans had employed, often unable to fully understand it. Scientists and engineers studied fragments of reports, but the true scale of the operation remained a mystery. The galaxy could only witness the outcome, a species that had waited patiently, acted deliberately, and achieved total control when provoked. Back on Earth, the quiet strength that had always defined humanity continued. Citizens lived under the same routines and systems they had before, unaware of how their actions had redefined interstellar order. Humanity had no desire to dominate the galaxy. The goal had never been conquest, but survival, clarity, and the enforcement of a single, unambiguous rule: the line must never be crossed. That rule had been demonstrated once, with finality, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The galaxy adjusted to a new reality. Earth became the reference point for caution and respect. Species calculated every move with humans in mind, knowing that the cost of ignoring a warning was total annihilation. Humanity's actions ensured that their planet and their people were no longer underestimated. Their patience and intelligence had rewritten the rules of engagement across the stars. From that moment on, Earth was not just a planet. It was a symbol of authority, precision, and restraint. Humanity's example served as a lesson for generations, a reminder that patience combined with preparedness could produce outcomes more powerful than brute force. The galaxy remembered the events, and the quiet planet that once seemed harmless became the line that no one dared to cross. Respect, fear, and awareness replaced arrogance and underestimation, and humanity continued its path, ready for the future, but never needing to raise its voice again.